Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a really exciting webinar, and I'm really very happy and privileged to be sharing this webinar with Fairtrade America and Divine, two great, fantastic organizations and companies that are really doing great work right now. And I think this topic is very exciting and one that's gaining a lot of momentum. But first, I wanted just to give a quick update and background on Grow Ahead. The organization that we represent. Grow Ahead was started a couple of years ago in an effort to pre-finance fair trade coffee containers. And this was done in conjunction with Cooperative Coffees, a cooperative of roasters here in North America, and the Progresso Foundation in Europe. And the idea was to really start to crowdfund pre-financing. And as time changed in the priorities for small-scale organic and fair trade farmer co-ops changed as well, Fair World Project, which is a fair trade project that's focused primarily on fair trade advocacy, took on Grow Ahead as an opportunity to really focus on climate resiliency on the ground with small scale farmers, considering that was one of the biggest priorities as they indicated themselves. And this is really important for a number of different reasons. One, for example, while most of the world talks about like emissions and polluting industries and those types of things, what most people don't realize is that industrial agriculture is responsible for anywhere between 20 to 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, small-scale farmers, which are historically misrepresented or disenfranchised, are producing the vast majority of the world's food on just a small fraction of the land. And in many cases, small-scale farmers are practicing agriculture, agroecology, or regenerative agriculture in such a way that not only does not emit as many greenhouse gases, but in often cases can, in fact, sequester carbon. And so one of the reasons why we chose to focus on climate resiliency as it relates to the food system is because in terms of our ability to tackle climate change, really agriculture is one of the best places to focus. As noted by the fantastic work of Paul Hawken and Project Drawdown, really agriculture is one of the sort of lowest hanging fruit in terms of the ways that we can really impact climate change, but also improve the livelihoods of farmers, improve human health and those types of things. And as you can notice here, things like regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, and intercropping are all things that can have a really powerful impact, not only in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, sequestering carbon, but also improving livelihoods and food security. So our real goal here is to make agriculture resilient in the face of climate change. And one thing that we've noticed over the last 10 years is while we've talked a lot in the media about climate change sort of slowly coming and impacting us, and we've seen this recently with supercharged hurricanes, really on the ground, farmers all around the world, not just in the global south, are facing climate change on a daily basis. And that's everything from water stress to high heat, off-season rain, not enough rain. And this has huge impacts. And we've actually seen quite a bit of crop loss in the last number of years. And many people on the call will be familiar with the impact that climate change has been having with coffee rust in Central America. So really climate resilience, a farm's and a community's ability to be resilient in face of these climate impacts is going to be a really big priority going forward. And this was something that we identified when collaborating with Fairtrade and in CLAC, the Small Scale Farmers Network of Latin America, and doing a program several years back in the lead up to the United Nations Conference of Parties for Climate Change by highlighting those voices of small scale farmers in light of climate change. So the primary mission of Grow Ahead is to crowdfund and support the efforts of small scale farmer organizations and their ability to address climate change and food security on the ground. And really, we see a number of different pathways to get sort of to this regenerative future. Certainly, there's a lot of discussion going on right now in the United States, at least, regarding education on regenerative agriculture. More and more companies and ethical businesses are really ramping up to meet this market demand for regenerative agriculture. But where we see a really big need and the niche that we fill is both by providing funding for those small-scale farmers organizations that are really rolling out and implementing these practices on the ground. And that funding would also support capacity building. We talk a lot about technical capacity or economic capacity, but really it's that social capacity, that knowledge base, which will be absolutely critical in terms of building out these regenerative skills. And we do this in a variety of different ways. One, we focus on farmer-to-farmer capacity building trainings, and I'll talk about that in a second. Second, we also provide funding for agricultural scholarships. We've seen this as a big need and a response that small-scale farmers organizations are requesting. We also have a revolving loan program, which helps provide solidarity financing for small-scale farmers organizations to be able to implement these projects. And then lastly, one program that we are just rolling out right now is a tree planting program which will help facilitate funding for implementing these types of agroforestry programs. So one thing that we've noticed over the last course of the 40 years or so of small-scale farmer and peasant farmer organizing is that farmer-to-farmer trainings are one of the best and most cost-efficient way to really scale out this notion of like capacity building that has the most impact for farmers. And this really came out of a huge movement out of Central America and the Caribbean some 40 years ago. And what farmers found was that in most cases, they're more interested in learning and sharing with their peers because they've got some skin in the game and they're invested. And over the last couple of years, what we've seen is that this is one of the best ways to actually scale out this, this knowledge base. And it's not coming from outside experts or anything else like that. And so our goal was really to help facilitate that process by raising funds and facilitating the gathering of these farmers. And we just had our first successful farmer-to-farmer training in Nicaragua last week, which brought together fair trade coffee cooperatives throughout Latin America to share skills on everything from agroforestry to soil fertility and even really planning in building out their capacity as organizations to be able to not only address the issue of climate resiliency, but also expand above and beyond that going forward in the future. So we're really excited about this program, and we'll be rolling out a number of other farmer trainings in the near future. Our next one will be sometime early in 2018 in West Africa, most likely Ghana, and we have a couple of other ones on tap as well. Secondly, what we've noticed is that many small-scale farmers organizations and co-ops are looking for funds to be able to provide advanced training for their farm leaders or even some of their technical staff. So our goal is to really help facilitate that process by raising funds for trainings. And most recently, we were able to help raise money for 10 scholarships for a fair trade coffee cooperative in Honduras called COMSA. And really their basis is fair trade coffee, but using their cooperative as a sort of launch pad, they've been able to create this entire training program and train not only members of their cooperative, but also members from other communities and other farmer organizations, not only in Honduras, but throughout Latin America. And so our hope is to really kickstart that process through scholarship funding. And then the next step is really loans. You know, one thing that we've noticed over the years is that many farmers organizations have great plans to be able to implement projects that could really have a positive impact as it relates to climate resiliency, but getting access to the capital to that financing at reasonable rates is sometimes really challenging. And so our hope is to meet sort of that demand for sort of small to medium-sized farm loans or organizational loans so that they can actually implement some of the projects, whether that's setting up a nursery for producing seedlings for their agroforestry program or building a centralized compost operation. Really our hope is to facilitate that process at really reasonable rates, whereas they might not otherwise be able to access that financing. And then lastly, one thing that we've noticed is that really to be able to finance the conversion to really a dynamic agroforestry system, this is going to cost, you know, a decent amount of money, at least from a local perspective. And one of the things that Paul Hawken and Project Drawdown noted was that on average, the cost to sort of implement a dynamic agroforestry operation generally throughout the world is going to be in and around $1,000 per hectare. So our hope is to help streamline that process by providing funding and financing to fast track that process to those organizations looking to implement agroforestry programs within their communities, not only to have like an ability to feed their communities and enhance their food security, but also enhance their ability to market those cash crops as well. And really, to be honest with you, you know, as a small organization that focuses primarily on crowdfunding, we don't have the resources that, say, a World Bank or USAID does to be able to, you know, generate millions of dollars to fund these different initiatives. And really, our hope is to act more as a catalyst and really support those organizations that are acting as pollinators to be able to have an impact in their community and then train those other organizations and farmers cooperatives within their network and in their neighborhoods. And that's really our focus is by supporting those organizations that are really looking forward to taking the next step and innovating both from a technical aspect, but also from a social capacity aspect as well. And so we have a couple of different ways that I'll just address real quick before we move on to the next speakers. For folks that are interested in getting involved. One, for those businesses, primarily those ethical businesses that we partner with, looking to provide support within their supply chain, whether that's training, funding, or financing for those projects where they're supplying from. So we're looking to sort of build out that program and partner with ethical businesses, primarily in North America. Certainly there's opportunities to give through the loan program or donate. If you live in the United States, that is a tax deduction. So that is also a good opportunity as well. And then finally, for those producer organizations in the Global South, we do have the opportunity to apply for funding, whether it's the loan program or through the training or scholarship program, and of course the Seedling program as well. And I'll just note that, some of the organizations that we started to work with in the last 6 months include Cooperative Coffees, COMSA, Organic Coffee of Marcala in Honduras, Chelsea Green, which is a fantastic publisher here in North America, and then Maggie's Organic Apparel, who's had a big commitment to fair trade and organics over the years. And we hope to build out this program to really expand in the near term so that we can continue to provide these funds and resources to producer organizations. And with that, I just want to say thank you all. That was kind of a very brief overview of some of the things that we are working on. Please get in touch with us if you are interested in participating in any way, and certainly follow us on any of the different social media programs. Thank you so much.
Awesome. That was great. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for giving us an overview of how Grow Ahead is supporting various agroforestry initiatives and ways that people can get involved. So just before I introduce the next speaker, a reminder that if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat, or you can also ask them on Twitter using Halloween webinar, #HalloweenWebinar. And stay tuned till the end of the webinar, where we'll be announcing the opportunity to win a chocolate prize from our friends at Divine Chocolate. So next up, we're going to hear from Margaret Conover. She's worked in sustainable development since 2010, when she began 2 years in Ecuador working with fair trade and organic sugarcane, cocoa, and coffee and citrus co-ops. Currently, Margaret is the External Relations Manager at Fairtrade America and the U.S. Office of the Fair Trade Certification. So without further ado, let's hear from Margaret on challenges faced by smallholder farmers, fair trade's environmental standards, and how fair trade farmers work for climate change adaptation and resilience. All right. Do you want to share your screen? Oh, your webinar. Fantastic.
Hi, thanks, Alex.
Welcome.
I was just going to turn on my camera for a second so that you guys can see me, since we said Halloween costumes optional. And we're having a Halloween party here at the office today, so I hope everybody is enjoying the day as much as we are. And I'm going to start sharing my screen now. All right. Did that go through?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So as Alex said, I am the External Relations Manager for Fairtrade America. We're the U.S. Office of the International Fair Trade Certification System, which represents about 1.7 million farmers and farm workers around the world. So many of you may be more familiar with fair trade as an economic and social model for bringing fairness to the trading system and empowering farmers to form cooperatives and other associations so that they have more power within the market. But what you might not know is that that also has a very large environmental component. So I'm going to share a little bit now about the environmental commitments that fair trade farmers make when they join our system, and then how they are tackling climate change in their own environments. So let's go. Small farmers are really some of the most affected by climate change around the world, as Ryan was sharing, even though they don't produce a lot of greenhouse gases and often are even sequestering carbon based on the way that they're farming. They still are experiencing a lot of the impact of climate change. And this for them is not a model on a computer or a controversial political situation. This is just their everyday reality. It's one of the biggest threats that small producers are facing, and it's leading around the world based on soil erosion, pests, diseases, and changing weather patterns to food security, income loss, and generally just a massive hassle for the farmers that it's affecting. So fair trade farmers, beyond just the commitments that they make when they join the system to using integrated pest management, which minimizes the use of agrochemicals and prohibits certain ones that are most dangerous, especially to humans and the environment, to proper waste management like trash and gasoline or oil storage, water and soil management and maintenance of soil fertility. And then fair trade also bans the use of GMO crops within our system in order to both protect farmers from predatory behavior on the part of agrochemical companies and to make sure that the biodiversity of the land that they're living on is not threatened. So beyond just this basic commitment that every fair trade farmer is participating in simply by becoming fair trade certified under our standards, fair trade farmers also attack some environmental issues through things like the organic premium, which gives an additional premium on top of the existing fair trade premium to farmers who choose to become organic certified as well. And that's something we really encourage them to strive towards. So if producers decide that that makes sense for their businesses and for their cooperatives, then we provide that capacity building and support for them to achieve the certification as well. And then additionally, we really try to help them aim for sustainable production through fair trade minimum prices in a lot of commodities like coffee. And that helps them cover at least the cost of production of their farm activities, as well as them getting the fair trade premium on top of it, which they can democratically decide as a cooperative how they want to invest. And many of them choose to invest that in environmental projects, especially climate change adaptation and mitigation. So I'm just going to give you a couple of specific examples of cooperatives that have used their fair trade premium towards creating systems that they incorporate into agroforestry. A lot of these are based on coffee, but that is not the only commodity in the fair trade system, as Liz is going to share a little bit later, and also not the only one that is able to be cultivated using agroforestry practices. So I just want to give the caveat that these are just specific examples of how co-ops have decided to use their premiums, not some kind of prescriptive way that we want fair trade farmers to have to do everything. So one way that farmers help their crops be healthier is through using vermiculture, which is worms. So coffee farmers in particular in Guatemala have been using vermiculture in order to create compost to put onto the coffee plants. And they keep them in these beds, like you can see on the picture on the left, because worms aren't native to North or South America, to quote unquote New World. So they try to keep them sequestered, and it also helps them gather the compost more easily. So in this project, the coffee farmers decided to, use vermiculture in order to combat coffee rust. So the worm compost is very rich in humic acid, which is very good for coffee trees. And so they gather the leaves of the coffee trees as well as scraps from kitchens, weeds, and then they put them in these beds that were built using the fair trade premium in order to cultivate the compost. And then they can gather about 50 kilos of organic vermiculture manure, worm poop, and put it back onto the coffee trees, which helps create healthier soil and makes the trees protected from coffee rust, because just like us, when we get run down and low on vitamins and we haven't been eating well, then we're more susceptible to getting sick. Trees work similarly, so they need healthy soil in order to grow properly and be able to combat this disease. So even though, and actually these pictures are from two different co-ops. The one on the left is from one in India who's also doing a similar project. But the example that I gave of coffee rest in Guatemala is being done in the villages of Pasac and Yixigup, I hope I said that right, with two cooperatives that made up of about 150 families. So vermiculture is a great way for fair trade farmers to deal with coffee rust. And Ryan also mentioned pollinators. So fair trade loves pollinators also. Another thing that climate change does in terms of coffee farmers in particular is threatens their yield levels. So when coffee trees are unhealthy and attacked by pests, they don't make as many cherries, and coffee rust especially can cause the cherries to turn black and fall off, which is super bad news if you're a farmer who's only getting one paycheck a year from your coffee harvest. So one way that farmers are incorporating additional streams of income is through beekeeping. So they put these hives in the coffee groves along with them, and coffee doesn't need bees or other insects to pollinate it. It can be self or wind pollinated, but having insects definitely helps the yield increase a lot better. So with the bees, they're helping the trees produce more coffee cherries on the one hand, and they're creating additional streams of income for the co-op on the other hand. So in this particular example, which was done in collaboration with Food for Farmers in Guatemala as well, with two co-ops at Quesmac and Maya Ixil, they're able to produce this really high quality single origin honey, which helps both the trees and the co-op farmers to have additional streams of income. So then let's go on over to Asia, because Latin America is not the only place that's affected by climate change. So another way that farmers are incorporating agroforestry through premium projects is through planting other trees alongside coffee or intercropping with other food crops, or with crops that help enrich this, plants that help enrich the soil. So in this co-op, which I am going to completely butcher this name, and I'm sorry, Koperasi Baitul Kirad Baburayan in Indonesia, the co-op members decided that they wanted to use a premium project in order to do some erosion control with avocado trees. Again, that's a way for them to create additional streams of income and food security for the community, which they can do by growing the avocados and harvesting them for food. And then they also built this nursery, which you can see in the picture on the left, where they're growing ground cover. And then a lot of the families, like on the left, we have Saiban and his wife, Walija, who have a 1.5 acre coffee grove. They're intercropping with food crops like chilies, which they can also sell. And then this co-op was in particular affected by the earthquake back in 2014. And a lot of the success of their premium project was evident that there were many landslides in the area, but a lot of the area that had been planted with this ground cover and with the trees that they used from the premium wasn't affected. So the trees provide shade for the coffee plants, which is good, additional streams of income and enriching the soil, and then even help shield the community from some of these natural disasters that they would otherwise not be well affected by. And then another co-op who has a test farm in Pangao, Peru, is using similar techniques where they're doing reforestation with pine trees, which provides, again, shade for the coffee trees, erosion protection, but also additional streams of income by doing sustainable and managed timber cultivation. So they're able to have a nursery through the Fairtrade Premium Project, and extra support from Lidl, the German grocery store that you might have seen recently come into the United States. It's new here. They were sponsored in order to have this pine reforestation project as a way to test out solutions for other cooperatives around the area, and also to create these additional income streams for the farmers. So those are all the examples I'm going to give. If you're interested, and I would also like to encourage you guys to check out our YouTube channel, where Fairtrade farmers can tell you in their own words what they're doing to combat climate change. We have this series called Fairtrade Climate Heroes. It's a series where we've interviewed a number of farmers who are dealing with climate change in their own way. And this video in particular talks a lot about agroforestry. So if you're interested in that and how farmers like Zaidi Rotik, who is one of our coffee farmers in Kenya, have dealt with this on their own farms, then you should definitely check it out. And lastly, I want to really emphasize that all of these solutions are producer-led. So Fairtrade at heart is about producer empowerment. We believe that power structures have created the poverty systems that we're dealing with today. And part of getting out of that is letting producers decide for themselves how they want to run their own lives and their own businesses. So all of these climate solutions that I just shared with you have been led by co-ops within their own communities, identifying these solutions and trying them out to see how it improves their farms, their livelihoods, and helps insulate them from climate change. That's something we're very passionate about, and something that I think makes Fairtrade unique in the world, especially in the development sector. And I am really excited to be able to be a part of it, and also excited for Liz to now tell you about a really amazing example of producer ownership in our system, and how they have used the brand of Divine Chocolate in order to bring growth and solutions to their own community. So thank you so much for letting me be able to share with you today.
Thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate you taking the time, and it was awesome to learn more about Fairtrade and the work going on the ground to combat climate change and implement different systems like agroforestry. So just a quick announcement before we introduce the next speaker, Liz. So just a reminder to stick around until the end, because we're going to be announcing the prize details on how you could get your very own Fairtrade chocolate from Divine. And also I see that there's been some questions trickling in the chat, which is great. Don't forget, we're going to save some time at the end to go through those in a conversation with our speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Liz Miller from Divine Chocolate USA. She's the senior marketing manager. She has led the marketing efforts for North America for the past 3 years. Prior to Divine Chocolate, she worked in marketing and communications roles in the nonprofit sector with a focus on international development, global philanthropy, and refugee issues. Liz also has a master's degree in international human rights with concentrations in women's empowerment and sub-Saharan Africa. So we're going to hear from Liz today on achieving gender equality and women's empowerment for cocoa producers in the face of climate change. Liz, we're so happy you could join us today. I'm going to stop my screen share and you can go for it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Liz.
Let me pull it up. All good? See?
Looks good. Can everyone else see?
Okay.
I think we're good. Thanks, Liz.
All right. Thank you again. So as Alex mentioned, I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for Divine Chocolate. Some of the questions I plan to answer during my presentation include, what is women's role in cocoa farming in Ghana? What are some of the issues related to women in cocoa farming? Why is it important to include gender equality and women's empowerment when we talk about climate change? And what are some of the ways farmer organizations support women in cocoa farming? So before I get started, here's a little bit about Divine Chocolate. What you should know about Divine Chocolate as a product is that it's extremely delicious. I do say that lightheartedly, but quality is actually a very important part of women's role in cocoa farming. So knowing that we're a premium chocolate brand and a high quality brand is also integral to the inclusion of women in cocoa farming as well. Divine Chocolate products are also 100% Fairtrade certified, meaning that any ingredient in our products that can be Fairtrade certified is. So not just the cocoa, but also things like the vanilla, sugar, mangoes, coconuts, things like that. What you should know about Divine Chocolate as a company is that it is co-owned by cocoa farmers. So 44% of Divine is owned by Coapa Cocoa, a co-op of over 85,000 cocoa farmers in Ghana. And this unique business model is really what sets us apart from the competition. And it's what places farmers higher up the value chain, which is really one of our ultimate goals. So the cocoa market typically only delivers one income stream for most farmers, and it's usually only about $300 a year. But the members of Coapa Cocoa receive 4 income streams. So the first is, of course, income from the cocoa sales. So basically, this is what the farmers receive per bag of cocoa that they produce. Based on the market, they'll receive the fair trade price or the market price, whichever one is higher. They receive the fair trade premium, which is sort of like a bonus amount that they receive on top of the cocoa price. And the great thing about this is that the farmers get to vote and decide on how they'd like to spend this money in their communities. The Producer Support and Development Fund is specific to Divine Chocolate. This more than doubles the impact of fair trade, and we invest 2% of our annual revenue into this fund, and it supports specific projects such as training farmers, help with governance, and programs to promote gender equality. Finally, they receive a profit dividend. So profits from co-ownership provide additional income to invest in business development skills and the democratic process of Coapa. It also gives them a share in the wealth that they, as farmers, have helped to create. And as co-owners, they also hold 2 seats on the Divine Board of Directors. So a little bit about cocoa and climate change. Cocoa is specifically produced in countries in a belt between 10 degrees north and 10 degrees south of the equator, where the climate is appropriate for growing cocoa trees. And the natural habitat of the cocoa tree, as you can see here, is sort of in the lower level of the evergreen rainforest. And climatic factors such as temperature and rainfall are particularly important in encouraging optimum growth. The cocoa plants respond well to relatively high temperatures, but variations in the yield of cocoa trees from year to year are affected more by rainfall than any other climate factor. In addition to climate change, cocoa production in this region also faces a few other challenges, such as the low productivity of the mostly overaged trees and small farms that don't typically provide enough income, and of course the lack of technical assistance to cocoa farmers in most countries. So when we talk about women's role in cocoa farming, in Ghana specifically, since that is where the cocoa for Divine Chocolate comes from, 25% of cocoa farmers are women according to official figures, but there is significant underreporting of these figures due to a bias towards farmers being defined by land ownership, from which women are often excluded. A significantly larger number of women in Ghana provide labor on cocoa farms, particularly those that are owned by their husbands and families, but they are often not recognized for their roles in cocoa farming. Lots of experts tend to agree that women farmers are critical to the success of initiatives to increase two specific things: quality and production. And this is particularly important when you consider that the quality level and dwindling supply of cocoa are among the greatest challenges for the industry, especially when you think about climate change. So women farmers in Ghana and elsewhere are participating in all stages of cocoa production to varying degrees, and they are essential to the sustainability of the cocoa supply chain and cocoa growing communities. So some of the major issues related to women in cocoa farming are as followed. First and foremost, just the simple fact of acknowledging women as farmers. Until now, there's typically been this tendency to focus on women's roles as caregivers and custodians of cocoa communities, but there really needs to be a shift towards acknowledging women's existing and future roles, really in the core production and quality of cocoa. Context and social norms. So in order to support women's roles in the cocoa sector, an organization or company must have a basic understanding of the specific needs for that location. Education is really important. So the level of illiteracy among women has usually been a significant barrier, both practical and psychological, to fully participate in leadership and decision-making. Underrepresentation. So without women in leadership roles, there are fewer people in positions of power who can advocate for women's individual needs. And technical training, many training programs don't take into account the different needs that women have, and that can mean the design of the courses or where they're held or what time of day they're held. Those things can sometimes exclude women and not take into account what they need in order to attend. Finally, so the access to credit and resources is important to identify some of women's financial needs at different stages of their development. So we've talked a little bit about cocoa and climate change and women's roles. So when we put those things together, what is this sort of double injustice of gender equality and climate change? There's a report that CARE International has put out, and I really like the terminology that they use in the way they describe it, which basically they say gender equality is a root cause of poverty. Climate change, in turn, is making poverty worse, and this means that the chances of achieving a better life for many women and girls in poverty are threatened by this double injustice, so climate change and gender equality. So what do we mean when we actually say gender equality and women's empowerment? Those are words that are tossed around a lot. I see women's empowerment everywhere, and so sometimes it's just hard for us all to come to an actual agreement of what they mean. So when I say gender equality, I mean the equal enjoyment by women, girls, men, and boys of the rights, opportunities, resources, and rewards. It doesn't necessarily mean that women and men are the same, but that their enjoyment of the rights and opportunities doesn't depend on their being born male or female. The UN actually has a really lovely set of guidelines that define women's empowerment. So, and I think that they do a nice job of including a lot of different things. So they say that it entails 5 components: a sense of self-worth, choices, access to opportunities and resources, the power to control their own lives, and their ability to influence the direction of social change. So as access to natural resources dwindles in the face of these weather extremes, and as people are looking to find ways to develop strategies to deal with those changes, their options can strongly depend on whether they are male or female. So when you increase women's roles and rights and representation in climate-related sectors such as cocoa farming, the ultimate outcome we're hoping to achieve is reducing the level of risk that women face from climatic shocks. So as I mentioned before, Divine Chocolate is co-owned by a cooperative of cocoa farmers in Ghana called Coapa Cocoa. It's made up of over 85,000 farmers, and over a third of those farmers are women. Since 1993, when the co-op started, they've been introducing initiatives to work towards gender equality, collaborating with partners, including Divine, to encourage, mentor, and give women a voice. Some of the following slides are a few examples of some of the initiatives that Coapa has been putting forth. Just a few years ago, starting in 2012, I believe it was, Coapa coordinated the Leadership and Business Skills for Women Fair Trade Producers program. I know it's a mouthful. It focused on women's legal rights, leadership, and business skills. It sort of had this cascade approach where small groups of experts trained women in the co-op, who then trained other local women, who in then turn trained other women in the communities. So as a result, these trainings, along with the formation of sort of the district level gender committee, led to a 75% increase in the number of women putting themselves forward to these leadership positions. So now we have nearly half of the entire National Executive Council. So the top people who are making decisions and being elected to make decisions on behalf of all of the farmers are now filled by women. So some of the another lesson that we have from Coapa Cocoa is with these agricultural extension programs. So these were created to increase yield and quality of cocoa. So there were 2 test districts that started offering these rural service centers, which offered opportunities for farmers to have access to inputs such as fertilizers and farm tools, as well as training for agricultural practices. Women's groups have also been formed in the co-op, which together can now access loans. And the co-op has made changes to make access to credit more inclusive and to facilitate women's needs. So for example, they don't necessarily need collateral to secure loans, which is often a barrier for women. So cocoa growing only happens in 2 major harvest seasons each year. So when it's in the off season, it's really important for women to have alternative ways to make money. So women's groups have been created in order to teach some new skills such as liquid soap making and screen printing. And then finally, one of the major programs, which has actually been funded by Fairtrade premiums, are literacy and numeracy classes. So the low levels of literacy among women has prevented them from participating actively in Coapa Cocoa, in particular in positions of leadership and responsibility. And as such, this literacy program started, and women soon began finding themselves having a lot more ease in managing their day-to-day tasks, even things such as simple as reading signs for the bus or helping their children with homework. So finally, I wanted to give one specific example highlighting how Coapa's approach has had an impact. This is Mercy Za. I was very fortunate to host Mercy here in the US back in the spring, which I'll get into in a moment. But Mercy is 55, which is actually sort of the average age of a cocoa farmer. She owns 19 acres of land. She joined in 1999 because she had heard around her village that Coapa was an organization that really cared for its farmers. So since joining Coapa in 1999, she has gotten into some leadership roles. She has also been direct beneficiary of the literacy classes, and these skills really serve her in many ways. So being able to read and write allows her to substitute in as a recorder when her husband, who normally fills the role, is out. So a recorder typically is the person who weighs the cocoa beans, records the weight, and pays the farmers. So it's really expanded her opportunity to participate in the day-to-day activities of cocoa farming. So here is Mercy when she was presenting to a group of folks here in DC where we're based. She also presented at nearly 30 events and meetings in DC and Austin. One of the most amazing reasons why this is just, I just love seeing this photo, because she told me that she had only learned English, only learned how to read about 3 years ago. So this feat of her being able to come around and really have a voice and speak on behalf of the cooperative, where she herself is a co-owner of a chocolate company, was just really inspiring. So moving forward, in this world where, you know, you have only like 62 people who own as much as the poorest half of the world's population, the need for companies like Divine, which seek to address inequality by developing these really radical models of business, is really more urgent than ever. And we plan to continue working on improving our own practices and contributing further to the goals of gender equality and women's empowerment. We will continue to champion the work that Co-op Cocoa itself as a co-op has done to empower women and improve the income of its members. Gender equality in itself is an important goal, but especially in the face of climate change, when you have the opportunity for women to really be placed in a vulnerable position, it's vitally important to integrate gender equality into existing models of business and farming. So for all of you, I encourage you to continue buying Divine chocolate, spreading the word about our brand, so that more people will know our brand story and our business model. And in your own work, I encourage you to find ways to generate support for these goals as well. And hopefully you can see that doing the way we do business can be successful. So thank you, and good luck to the people who end up winning the chocolate.
Wow. Thanks, Liz. That was absolutely inspiring. I think Divine is an amazing example of a business empowering women in agriculture and food production. I know that came up in the questions. So it was just fantastic to learn more about fair trade in action, and how you can be a profitable business and be doing amazing things on the ground. So thanks so much for taking the time. Other comments that we're seeing in the chat is how integrated organic and agroecological practices are with fair trade practices, and there's not much awareness about that. So I think that's something quite interesting to folks who might not have known as much about fair trade before. Well, so let's dive into some of the questions that have come up. Margot, there's a few for you that I think pertain specifically to Fairtrade America. So let's start there. I'm gonna list two of them, and maybe you could answer them together to be efficient with our limited time. So firstly, do you run any online fair trade courses? And secondly, we've had a couple of questions about the cost to implement fair trade. Mm-hmm. So in terms of production adaptation, as well as the cost for having the label. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about how this works, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't do a course in the traditional sense online, but if you're interested in learning more or getting involved with fair trade supporters in general, then you can do a couple of things. We have a newsletter that you can sign up to, and in the follow-up to the webinar, we can send that out. That often has events, other webinars like this, articles, or ways that you can get tapped into fair trade activities around the United States. And then also, if you're really interested in getting involved, you could think about starting a fair trade campaign in your town or on campus, or if you belong to a faith organization, that's a great organization that you can connect into to be around other like-minded individuals and work towards bringing fair trade into your own environment. And then in terms of cost, it's purposely varied from commodity to commodity. So an easy example that we like to use for fair trade minimum price is that, or I'm sorry, fair trade premium, which Liz kind of explained how that works. It's an additional bonus that fair trade farmers are paid on top of the cost of the actual goods themselves. So an easy example for that is bananas. They get, in our system, $1 per box more than they would if they were selling it conventionally. So when you're talking about several tons, or an easier way to think about it maybe is like a container that would sit on the back of a semi-truck, that's a lot of boxes of bananas, and so it adds up as a lot of additional income for the farmers as they go along. We do make farmers pay to get fair trade certified, and the reason why we want to do that is because for one thing, we, unlike a lot of other development organizations who also do good work, we just have a different model that thinks about farmers as our partners and treats them as small businesses as opposed to beneficiary population. So we think that in working with them to pay for fair trade certification through our system, it creates buy-in on their behalf so that they're motivated to maintain the certification and to follow the standards, because they have invested this money to grow their business, to grow their associations through the cooperative model, and then through the fair trade price and premium, they're able to recoup that cost. And that is what our job is here in the US when we're talking about creating markets for fair trade commodities. We need to make sure that they have that market available to them so that businesses are wanting to source from fair trade certified farmers, and to use the label on their products to tell their consumers, hey, this is from farmers that did a really awesome job, that did everything right. They're doing responsible environmental practices, safe and healthy and respectful social practices, and we as a business are paying them adequately for all the hard work that they put into it. So I hope that answers the question, and happy to take as many emails or continue conversations offline in the future.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Margot. One additional question that I think pertains specifically to you. Is there any strategic plan to increase the environmental standards in fair trade?
Yeah, so we're actually going through a consultative process on a number of the standards right now. So we have different standards for each of the commodities that we work in, and they're updated at least every 5 years. And I'm also happy to share in the notes following this webinar the link to that page if people are interested in checking out the specifics of the process, because it is very comprehensive and incorporates a lot of work with producers themselves, so that it's not just a bunch of people in North America and Europe being like, this is what you have to do. We want to get their input and make sure that they're involved in the process. So a couple of them that are taking place right now are pineapples, cocoa, general fresh fruit one. I believe those are the three that are going on at the moment, but I'll send out links to those consultation processes. And if you are interested in contributing to them at all, if you have thoughts about how we could do the system better, the consultation is open to everybody, and we think it's important to get feedback from stakeholders and supporters as well. So I encourage all of you who feel strongly about it to participate. In particular, the environmental standards are also under review. So there's a list of prohibited chemicals that's part of the fair trade system, and that process is also under review right now to make sure that we're paying attention to science and making sure we incorporate any new safety procedures, or if there's other chemicals that have come on the market that are not on the list and they're dangerous to people or to the environment, that those are being put on our prohibited materials list. So long story long, yes. there's a plan to make it better.
That's great. Okay, thanks, Margot. If anyone has any additional questions, perhaps you could send Margot an email. I have about 4 questions for Liz in the last 2 minutes. I'm sorry, Liz. We might go a couple of minutes over to give you, I know everyone's time is precious, but just to give you a little more time to answer them. So I'll just run through them quickly. Where can we find Divine chocolate in Canada, in the Ottawa area? Question number 2, what are the main challenges for implementing Fairtrade certification? Question number 3, many alternative agri-food movements rely on labeling based on standards and market niches. Do you think this approach could be used for the gender perspective, creating a specific labeling system? And finally, what is the potential of fair trade to reduce deforestation? That's a lot of questions, but feel free to answer what you can, and anyone who doesn't feel like their question was answered can follow up by email. Thanks,
Yeah,
Liz.
so I will answer the first one, which is that I actually have a list of Canadian retailers that I can send to the person who wanted that information. Please just send me an email, liz@divinechocolateusa.com. And then the other ones are a little bit more in depth, so I'll just, I'm happy to answer them or have further conversations later. I did want to make a note about the specific labeling system. So I don't know if this is what you mean, but we do actually have one bar, that our dark chocolate with hazelnut truffle, which has a little icon on it that refers to empowering women, and it has a little bit of information on the back of the bar about the women's programs. So we found it as a somewhat reliable way of talking about this business model when it comes to packaging and labeling. So it's been one way that we have tried to get that out there.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. So we'll follow up on those in-depth questions at another time. I'm also really interested to hear those answers. Well, so let's wrap up. It's 1 o'clock. I'm going to share my screen to give you the information about the giveaway. So once I share my screen, basically how it's going to work is there's going to be a code word on the screen, and you'll send an email to coordinator@growahead.org with the keyword. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And there you go. View full screen. Okay, so the first 3 people based in the United States only to email coordinator@growahead.org with the keyword will receive delicious, high-quality chocolate from Divine Chocolate, which we all heard all about today. So thank you to all of you for attending, for taking the time out of your busy schedules. A huge thanks to Grow Ahead, Divine, and Fairtrade America for being such awesome co-organizers and really helping spread the word to all of you who made it today. Stay tuned for more webinars by Grow Ahead in the coming months. And this will be recorded and posted online, so you'll be able to rewatch it or share. Thank you all for joining. I hope you caught that keyword, because I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Bye. See you next time.